I smoothed my dress for the 100th time, trying to calm my nerves as I set the table for our weekly family dinner. The clinking of silverware against china echoed through the dining room, a stark contrast to the uneasy silence that had settled over our home. "Ethan, honey?" I called out, my voice wavering slightly. "Is your mother here yet?" My husband's muffled reply came from upstairs. "She'll be here soon, Amelia. Stop fussing." I sighed, arranging the napkins just so. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Ethan had been acting strange all week, huddled in whispered conversations with his mother, Martha, that would abruptly stop whenever I entered the room. The doorbell rang, and I hurried to answer it, plastering on a smile. "Martha, welcome. Come on in." My mother-in-law swept past me, her perfume leaving a cloying trail. "Ethan, darling," she called out, completely ignoring me. I closed the door, took a deep breath, and followed her into the living room. Ethan appeared at the bottom of the stairs, grinning widely as he embraced his mother. "Mom, you're right on time," he said, shooting me a pointed look. "Unlike some people." I bit my tongue, refusing to take the bait. "Dinner's ready whenever you two are," I said, forcing cheerfulness into my voice. As we settled around the table, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Ethan and Martha kept exchanging glances, barely concealed smirks playing at the corners of their mouths. "So, Amelia," Martha began, her tone dripping with false sweetness, "Ethan tells me you've been quite busy at work lately. I do hope you're not neglecting your wifely duties." I nearly choked on my water. I'm managing just fine, thank you," I stammered, looking to Ethan for support. He merely shrugged, suddenly very interested in his mashed potatoes. The conversation continued, with Martha peppering me with thinly veiled insults and Ethan offering no defense. I felt like I was under siege in my own home. As I stood to clear the plates, Ethan suddenly piped up. "Oh, Amelia, I almost forgot. I made a special dessert just for you." My eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You did?" He nodded, a strange glint in his eye. "It's in the kitchen. Why don't you go get it?" Confused but hopeful, I made my way to the kitchen. Perhaps this was Ethan's way of making amends for his recent behavior. I opened the refrigerator, scanning the shelves for this mysterious dessert. That's when I heard it, muffled laughter from the dining room. I froze, straining to hear their hushed conversation. "Did you see her face?" Martha cackled. "She actually believed you made her something special." Ethan's voice joined in. "I know. It's almost too easy." My heart sank as realization dawned. There was no dessert. This was all part of some cruel prank they had cooked up together. I gripped the edge of the counter, fighting back tears. How had my marriage come to this? When had I become the target of their twisted games? Taking a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and grabbed a store-bought pie from the pantry. I wouldn't let them see how much they had hurt me. As I re-entered the dining room, Ethan and Martha's laughter abruptly ceased. I set the pie down with a forced smile. "Here we go. I hope everyone likes apple." The look of disappointment on their faces was almost comical. I cut 3 slices, my hands steady despite the storm raging inside me. "This isn't what you said you made," Martha said accusingly, glaring at Ethan. I met her gaze, my voice steady. "No, it isn't. But it's what we have." As we ate in uncomfortable silence, I made a decision. Things couldn't go on like this. Something had to change, and soon. The morning after the disastrous family dinner, I found myself staring at old photographs, tracing the path that led me to this moment. My fingers lingered on a picture of my father, David, his stern face a reminder of the expectations that had shaped my life. "Amelia," my mother's voice echoed in my memory, "your father has arranged a meeting with a promising young man. It's time you settled down." I shook my head, trying to dispel the ghosts of the past. How naive I'd been, thinking an arranged marriage could lead to happiness. Ethan had seemed so charming at first, his smile warm and inviting. But now, the sharp ring of my phone startled me out of my reverie. It was my father. "Amelia," he barked without preamble, "I need you and Ethan at the office this afternoon." There's an important client meeting, and I want to introduce him to the team. My stomach churned. Dad, I don't think Dash. No excuses. He cut me off. This is crucial for the company. Be there at 2 p.m. sharp. The line went dead before I could protest. I sighed, dreading the thought of playing happy couple with Ethan in front of my father and his associates. As if summoned by my thoughts, Ethan appeared in the doorway. "Who was that?" he asked, his tone suspiciously light. "My father," I replied, watching his reaction carefully. "He wants us both at the office this afternoon for a client meeting." A flicker of something excitement, anxiety, crossed Ethan's face before he schooled his features into neutrality. "Both of us? That's unusual." I nodded, my suspicion growing. "Yes, it is. Is there something I should know, Ethan?" He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "Not at all. We should get ready." The drive to my father's office was tense, filled with uncomfortable silence. As we walked into the sleek, modern building, Ethan's hand found the small of my back, guiding me forward. To anyone watching, we must have looked like the perfect couple. My father's assistant ushered us into the conference room, where David sat at the head of the table, flanked by several serious-looking men in suits. "Ah, there you are," David boomed, rising to greet us. "Gentlemen, this is my daughter Amelia and her husband, Ethan." As introductions were made, I couldn't help but notice the way Ethan puffed up under my father's approving gaze. It was a side of him I rarely saw at home. The meeting dragged on, full of corporate jargon and thinly veiled power plays. I found my mind wandering, until a familiar name caught my attention. And of course, my father was saying, "Ethan will be overseeing the project personally. He's been instrumental in securing this deal." I whipped my head around to stare at Ethan, who looked like the cat who got the cream. This was news to me. When had he been working on such an important project? As the meeting wrapped up, my father pulled Ethan aside, speaking in low, excited tones. I strained to hear, catching snippets about a promotion and increased responsibilities. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Ethan's recent secretive behavior, the hushed conversations with Martha, the smug looks. It wasn't just about tormenting me. He was angling for a bigger prize. I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to find Jacob, my junior colleague, looking concerned. "Are you okay, Amelia? You look pale." Before I could respond, Ethan was at my side, his arms snaking possessively around my waist. "She's fine," he said curtly, steering me away. "Just a bit tired." "Right, dear." I nodded mechanically, my mind reeling. As we left the office, I realized I was trapped in a game where I didn't even know all the players, let alone the rules. Ethan's phone buzzed as we reached the car. He glanced at it, a slow smile spreading across his face. "That was Mom," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "She's invited us over for dinner tonight. Won't that be nice?" I met his gaze, seeing the challenge there. Whatever Ethan and Martha were planning, it was clear I was just a pawn in their game. But as we drove towards another evening of veiled insults and hidden agendas, I made a silent vow. I wouldn't remain a victim forever. It was time to start playing by my own rules. The weeks following the office meeting were a blur of thinly veiled hostility and mounting tension. Ethan's behavior shifted dramatically, his once charming facade crumbling to reveal a cold, calculating stranger. Martha's influence seemed to grow stronger by the day, her presence a constant shadow in our home. One particularly trying evening, I found myself in the kitchen, mechanically preparing dinner while Ethan and Martha's voices drifted in from the living room. "She's becoming a liability, Ethan," Martha hissed. "You need to keep her in line if you want that promotion." I froze, straining to hear Ethan's response. "Don't worry, Mom," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I've got it under control. Amelia knows her place." The wooden spoon in my hand snapped, startling me out of my eavesdropping. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. This couldn't go on. Dinner that night was a minefield of barbed comments and loaded silences. Martha critiqued everything from my cooking to my appearance, while Ethan sat back, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Really, Amelia, Martha sighed, pushing away her barely touched plate. Would it kill you to put a little effort into your appearance? No wonder Ethan works such long hours. I gripped my fork tightly, biting back a retort. Ethan chuckled, the sound grating on my nerves. Now, Mom, he said, his tone mock soothing. We can't all be as put together as you. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. Excuse me, I muttered, fleeing to the sanctuary of our bedroom. Later that night, as Ethan slipped into bed beside me, I finally found the courage to speak up. Ethan, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. We need to talk about what's been happening. He sighed heavily, as if I was a child he had to humor. What now, Amelia? This isn't right, I pressed on. The way you and your mother treat me, the secrets, the constant criticism. I'm your wife, not your enemy. Ethan sat up, his face illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the window. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the man I'd married. But then his expression hardened. You knew what you were getting into when you married me, he said coldly. My career, my mother, they come first. It's time you accepted that and learned to adapt. I felt as if I'd been slapped. Adapt? To being treated like a second-class citizen in my own home. He shrugged, lying back down. That's life, Amelia. Grow up and deal with it. I lay there in stunned silence, tears pricking at my eyes. This wasn't the man I'd married. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned for myself. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I couldn't change Ethan or Martha, but I could change how I responded to their cruelty. No more meek acceptance, no more silent tears. I rose early, dressing with care in my most professional outfit. Ethan raised an eyebrow as I grabbed my keys. Where are you going so early? He asked, suspicion lacing his tone. I met his gaze steadily. To work, Ethan. I have a life outside of this house, you know. His eyes narrowed. Don't forget about the dinner party tonight. Mom's hosting it for some of Dad's important clients. You'd better be there. I nodded curtly, already dreading the evening ahead. But as I drove to the office, a plan began to form in my mind. If Ethan and Martha wanted to play games, I'd show them I could play too. At work, I threw myself into my projects with renewed vigor. Jacob, my junior colleague, noticed the change. Everything okay, Amelia? He asked, genuine concern in his eyes. I managed a small smile. It will be, Jacob. It will be. As I prepared to leave for Martha's dinner party, I steeled myself for the battle ahead. Tonight, I decided, would be different. Tonight, I would stand my ground. Little did I know, the evening would bring revelations that would shake the very foundations of my marriage and set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. Martha's dinner party was in full swing, the air thick with forced laughter and the clink of expensive crystal. I stood in a corner, nursing a glass of wine, feeling like a ghost in my own life. Ethan worked the room, his charm turned up to 11, while Martha basked in the attention of my father's associates. Amelia, dear. Martha's saccharine voice cut through my thoughts. Be a good girl and fetch some more hors d'oeuvres from the kitchen, won't you? I gritted my teeth, ready to refuse, when I caught my father's stern gaze from across the room. Swallowing my pride, I nodded and retreated to the kitchen. As I arranged canapés on a silver platter, I overheard hushed voices from the adjacent study. Curiosity got the better of me, and I crept closer to listen. It's all falling into place, Ethan's voice tinged with excitement. Once this merger goes through, I'll be next in line for CEO. And Amelia? Martha asked, her tone dripping with disdain. Ethan chuckled darkly. She's served her purpose. Once I'm at the top, we can quietly remove her from the picture. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling a gasp. The platter crashed to the floor, shattering the silence. Amelia! Ethan called out, his voice sharp with suspicion. Heart pounding, I scrambled to clean up the mess, my mind reeling from what I'd just heard. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. Clumsy as ever, he sneered, stepping over the broken glass. Clean this up and join us. And try not to embarrass me further. As he left, I leaned against the counter, fighting back tears. The full weight of my isolation crashed down on me. Who could I turn to? Who would believe me over Ethan, the golden boy of my father's company? The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I plastered on a smile, playing the dutiful wife while my world crumbled around me. As the last guest left, Ethan cornered me in the foyer. "What did you hear?" he hissed, gripping my arm painfully. I met his gaze, summoning every ounce of courage I had. "Enough to know what you really think of me." His eyes flashed with anger. But before he could respond, Martha glided into the room. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her eyes glinting with malice. Ethan released me, his mask of civility sliding back into place. "Of course, Mother. Amelia's just tired from all the excitement." I retreated to our bedroom, locking the door behind me. Sleep eluded me as I tossed and turned, replaying the evening's events in my mind. By dawn, I had made a decision. At breakfast, I announced my intentions to visit my mother, Victoria, for a few days. Ethan barely looked up from his newspaper. "Fine," he muttered. "Just be back for the company gala next week. I need you there to keep up appearances." As I packed my bag, a plan began to form. I needed evidence, something concrete to prove Ethan's true nature. My eyes fell on the smart home device on our nightstand. With trembling fingers, I accessed its settings, enabling the recording function. Before leaving, I placed a call to Jacob at the office. "I need a favor," I whispered, glancing nervously over my shoulder. "Can you discreetly look into some financial records for me?" His response was immediate and reassuring. "Of course, Amelia. Whatever you need." As I drove to my mother's house, a mix of fear and determination coursed through me. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't just running away. I was taking the first step towards reclaiming my life. Little did I know the worst was yet to come. The next few days would test me in ways I never imagined, forcing me to confront not just Ethan and Martha, but the harsh realities of my own complicity in this toxic situation. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but I was finally ready to walk it, no matter the cost. The days at my mother's house passed in a blur of quiet conversations and long walks. Victoria's concern was palpable, but I couldn't bring myself to reveal the full extent of my marital troubles. As the company gala approached, dread settled in my stomach like a lead weight. "Are you sure you're all right, dear?" Victoria asked as I prepared to leave. "You know you can always stay longer." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mom. Really. I just needed a little break." The drive back home felt like a journey to the gallows. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Ethan's car was already there. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself and entered the house. The silence that greeted me was eerie. No Ethan, no Martha. Just the faint hum of the air conditioning. I made my way upstairs, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. As I approached our bedroom, I heard muffled voices. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, listening intently. "She's getting suspicious, Ethan." Martha's voice tinged with irritation. "We need to act fast." "Relax, Mother," Ethan replied, his tone dismissive. "I've got it under control. After tonight's gala, everything will fall into place." My blood ran cold. What were they planning? I retreated quietly, my mind racing. I needed to find out more, but how? The answer came to me as I unpacked my bag. The smart home device. With trembling fingers, I accessed the recordings from the past few days. Hours of silence, punctuated by snippets of conversation that made my skin crawl. Ethan and Martha discussing ways to handle me. Plans for the company that sounded suspiciously like fraud. And worst of all, a conversation about tampering with my food to make me more compliant. I felt sick. How had I been so blind? As I sat there, overwhelmed by the evidence of their betrayal, a new determination rose within me. I couldn't let them win. With shaking hands, I called Jacob. "Did you find anything?" I whispered. "Amelia, you need to be careful," he replied, his voice urgent. "There are some serious discrepancies in the company accounts, all tied to projects Ethan's been overseeing." My mind raced. This was it, the proof I needed. But before I could respond, I heard footsteps approaching. "I have to go," I hissed, ending the call just as Ethan entered the room. "Ah, you're back," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Perfect timing. We need to leave for the gala soon." I nodded, my heart pounding. "Of course. I'll get ready." As I dressed for the gala, a plan began to form. I couldn't confront Ethan and Martha directly. Not yet. But I could gather more evidence, maybe even catch them in the act. The gala was a glittering affair, full of fake smiles and veiled threats. I played my part, the dutiful wife hanging on Ethan's every word. But inside I was seething. Midway through dinner, Ethan leaned over, his breath hot on my ear. "Martha's prepared a special dessert just for you," he murmured. "You should feel honored." Alarm bells rang in my head. The recordings. The talk of tampering with my food. This was it. As Martha approached with a beautifully decorated plate, I made a split-second decision. With an exaggerated gesture, I knocked over my wine glass, sending red liquid cascading across the pristine tablecloth. "Oh, I'm so clumsy," I exclaimed, jumping up. "Martha, I'm so sorry. Here, let me take that while you clean up." Before either of them could react, I had whisked the plate away, switching it with another dessert from a nearby table. Martha's face contorted with barely concealed rage. "No need, dear. I'll get you a fresh one." "Oh, don't bother," I said, forcing a laugh. "This one looks just as delicious." As I sat back down, I caught a glimpse of Ethan and Martha exchanging furious glances. In that moment, I knew. Whatever they had planned, I had just derailed it. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of tension. As we drove home, Ethan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "That was quite a performance," he said, his voice dangerously low. I met his gaze steadily. "I don't know what you mean." As we pulled into the driveway, I made my decision. This charade couldn't continue. It was time to fight back, to reclaim my life. And tomorrow I would make my first move. The morning after the gala, tension hung thick in the air. Ethan's cold silence and Martha's barely concealed fury made the house feel like a powder keg ready to explode. I moved cautiously, hyper-aware of their every movement. As I prepared lunch, Martha sauntered into the kitchen, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. "Amelia, dear," she cooed, "I feel terrible about last night's dessert mishap. Let me make it up to you with a special dinner tonight." Alarm bells rang in my head, but I forced a smile. "That's very kind, Martha. Thank you." Throughout the day, I caught snippets of hushed conversations between Ethan and Martha. Their furtive glances in my direction only heightened my anxiety. I knew I had to act, but how? As evening approached, the smell of Martha's cooking filled the house. My stomach churned with dread as I sat down at the dining table. Ethan's eyes gleamed with an unsettling anticipation. Martha set a steaming plate before me with a flourish. "I've prepared your favorite, Amelia. Enjoy." I stared at the food, my mind racing. The recordings, the tampered dessert at the gala. Everything pointed to this moment. I couldn't eat it, but refusing outright would tip my hand. With a steady hand, I raised my fork to my lips, pretending to take a bite. "Delicious, Martha. Thank you." For the next excruciating hour, I pushed food around my plate, feigning enjoyment while my heart pounded in my chest. Ethan and Martha watched me like hawks, their impatience growing with each passing minute. Suddenly, Martha's face contorted in pain. She clutched her stomach, doubling over with a groan. What's happening?" she gasped. Ethan leapt to his feet, panic etched across his face. "Mom, are you okay?" I sat frozen, realization dawning. In my efforts to avoid the tampered food, I had inadvertently ensured Martha ate her own poisoned dish. As Martha's groans intensified, Ethan rounded on me, his eyes blazing with fury. "What did you do?" he snarled, advancing towards me. I scrambled backward, my chair clattering to the floor. "I didn't do anything. This was your plan, wasn't it? To poison me?" Ethan's face paled, his anger giving way to shock. "How did you?" "I heard you," I spat, finding courage in my anger. "I heard everything. The recordings, the plans, all of it. Martha's pained whimpers filled the silence that followed my revelation. Ethan stood paralyzed, torn between his mother's distress and the realization that his schemes had been exposed. In that moment of chaos, I made my decision. I couldn't stay in this house a minute longer. I bolted for the door, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Amelia, wait!" Ethan called after me, but I was already halfway down the driveway. I jumped into my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. As I peeled out of the driveway, I saw Ethan in the rearview mirror, his face a mask of desperation. My mind raced as I drove aimlessly through the night. Where could I go? Who could I trust? The weight of everything I'd discovered pressed down on me, threatening to crush me. I found myself parked outside my parents' house, tears streaming down my face. How could I explain this to them? Would they even believe me over their golden boy, Ethan? As I sat there, paralyzed by indecision, my phone buzzed. A text from Jacob. "Amelia, I found something big. We need to talk. Now." My heart pounded. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. Whatever Jacob had discovered could be the key to unraveling Ethan's web of lies once and for all. With trembling fingers, I started the car again. As I drove towards Jacob's office, I knew I was heading towards a confrontation that would change everything. There was no turning back now. Whatever happened next, I was done being a victim. It was time to take control of my own story. My hands shook as I pulled into the parking lot of Jacob's office building. The night was eerily quiet, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. I found Jacob waiting for me at the entrance, his face etched with concern. "Amelia, thank goodness you're here," he said, ushering me inside. "You're not going to believe what I've found." We hurried to his office, where stacks of documents and a glowing computer screen awaited us. Jacob pulled up a series of spreadsheets, his voice low and urgent. "It's worse than we thought," he explained. "Ethan's been embezzling funds for years, funneling money through shell companies. And your father-in-law's company is at the center of it all." My world tilted on its axis. My father's company? But how? Jacob's eyes met mine, filled with sympathy. "Amelia, I think your father might be involved too." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. My father, the man I'd always looked up to, potentially complicit in Ethan's schemes? It was too much to process. As we pored over the evidence, my phone buzzed incessantly. Missed calls and frantic texts from Ethan flooded my screen. I silenced it, focusing on the damning information before me. Suddenly, a noise from the hallway made us both freeze. Footsteps growing closer. Jacob quickly locked the door, but it was too late. The handle jiggled, followed by a familiar voice that sent chills down my spine. "Amelia? I know you're in there. Open the door." Ethan. How had he found me? Jacob and I exchanged panicked glances. "The fire escape," he whispered, pointing to the window. As we scrambled to gather the evidence, Ethan's voice grew more insistent. "Amelia, please. We need to talk. Martha's in the hospital. This is all a misunderstanding." My heart raced as Jacob and I climbed out onto the fire escape. The cool night air hit my face as we descended, documents clutched tightly to my chest. Just as we reached the ground, I heard the office door burst open above us. "She's gone out the window." Ethan's voice echoed in the night. We ran, our footsteps thundering on the pavement. I could hear Ethan gaining on us, his breath ragged. "Jacob, take the documents," I gasped, shoving the papers into his hands. "Get them to my mother. I'll hold him off." Before Jacob could protest, I turned to face my husband. Ethan skidded to a stop, his face a mixture of anger and desperation. "Amelia, please," he panted. "You don't understand. I did it all for us, for our future." I stood my ground, years of pent-up anger and hurt bubbling to the surface. "No, Ethan. You did it for yourself. I heard everything on the recordings. I know about the embezzlement, the lies, even your plan to poison me." Ethan's face paled. "The recordings? But how?" "It doesn't matter." I cut him off. "It's over, Ethan. All of it." He lunged forward, grabbing my arm. You can't leave me. Think about your father, your family's reputation. If this gets out, we'll all go down. I wrenched my arm free, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Then so be it. I'm done protecting you, done being your puppet. As I turned to leave, Ethan called out one last time, his voice breaking. Amelia, I love you. Please. I paused, looking back at the man I once thought I knew. No, Ethan. You never loved me. You loved what I represented, what my family could do for you. But that ends now. With those words, I walked away, leaving Ethan standing alone in the dark parking lot. As I hurried to catch up with Jacob, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my mother. Amelia. Victoria's voice was thick with emotion. We need to talk. Your father. He's confessed everything. My steps faltered as the weight of everything crashed down on me. In one night, my entire world had unraveled. As I climbed into Jacob's car, I realized this was just the beginning. The real battle, confronting my family, exposing the truth and reclaiming my life, was yet to come. With a deep breath, I nodded to Jacob. Let's go. It's time to end this once and for all. The next morning, I found myself sitting across from my father in his study, the weight of betrayal heavy in the air. David's face was haggard, his usual confident demeanor shattered. Amelia, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I leaned forward, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Tell me everything, Dad. No more lies. As David unraveled the tale of corruption and deceit, I felt a strange mix of anger and pity. He had started with small indiscretions, thinking he could fix things, but it had spiraled out of control. Ethan, seeing an opportunity, had wormed his way in, manipulating both David and me for his gain. I thought I was protecting you, David finished, his eyes pleading. But I see now I've only hurt you more. Before I could respond, the study door burst open. Ethan stood there, wild-eyed and desperate. Amelia, please. We can fix this. Your father and I, we can make it right. I stood, facing the two men who had shaped my life, who had betrayed my trust so deeply. No, Ethan. It's too late for that. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and played the recording of Ethan and Martha's conversation. Their cruel words filled the room, laying bare the extent of their manipulation. David's face crumpled in shock, while Ethan paled, realizing the game was up. Amelia, I can explain dash. There's nothing to explain. I cut him off, my voice stronger than I felt. It's over, Ethan. All of it. Just then, Jacob appeared in the doorway, flanked by two stern-looking men in suits. Mr. Thompson, one of them addressed my father. We're from the SEC. We need to ask you some questions about your company's financial practices. As the agents led my father away, I turned to Ethan one last time. I want a divorce, Ethan, and I want you out of my life for good. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, press conferences, and difficult conversations. The scandal rocked the business world, but I stood tall, determined to rebuild my life on my own terms. One crisp autumn morning, I found myself sitting in a small cafe, across from Jacob. His steady presence had been my rock through the storm, and I felt a warmth in my chest that I hadn't experienced in years. So, what's next for Amelia Thompson? Jacob asked, a soft smile playing on his lips. I took a sip of my coffee, considering. I'm not sure yet, but for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to find out. As we chatted, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me was different from the one who had started this journey. Stronger, wiser, and finally truly free. You know, I said, turning back to Jacob, I think I might write a book, share my story, help other women who might be trapped in similar situations. Jacob's eyes lit up. That's a brilliant idea, Amelia. You could help so many people. As we continued to talk, making plans and sharing dreams, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it head-on. Later that evening, as I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the sun set over the city, I thought about everything that had brought me to this moment. The pain, the betrayal, the hard-won victories. I took a deep breath, letting go of the last remnants of my old life. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive, truly myself. As I turned to go inside, my phone buzzed with a text from Jacob. "Dinner tomorrow? I know a great little place." I smiled, typing my reply. "Sounds perfect. Looking forward to it." Closing the balcony door behind me, I stepped into my new life, ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. The Amelia who had once been a victim was gone. In her place stood a survivor, a fighter, a woman ready to write her own story. And as I settled in for the evening, I knew that this was just the beginning of a whole new chapter. One filled with hope, strength, and the promise of a love built on trust and mutual respect. The kind of love I had always deserved.